Okay, you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHM WPPM. Tonight on the show, we'll be joined by Lisa Haver to discuss recent developments with the School District of Philadelphia's Board of Education, and Republican mayoral candidate David O will provide an update on his campaign. Denise, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. A lot going on, even though the election has ended. We still
Well,
have
politics never sleeps.
never stop, and politics and everything,
Mhm.
as you're going to hear about in just a second, from Lisa Haver, who is a member of the apps team, who does work on the public schools here in Philadelphia. I really recommend you take a look at their website. And I think that, you know, we're in a maybe an inflection point here in terms of the school district, school funding, those kinds of things. That even though the state ruled that the funding formula was unfair, nothing's changed yet, and we don't know what that's going to look like, which I think still leaves a lot of questions here. But some of the things that might be happening at the school district might be a little concerning. So that's what we talked to Lisa Haver about. So here's our interview with Lisa Haver.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, well, Lisa Haver, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Larry. It's good to be here with you.
So let's start with the Accelerate Philly plan. What in this plan is new, and what are we looking at as an ultimate result here?
Larry, it's Larry and Denise. It's really hard to say what's new. As member of the Alliance for Philadelphia Public Schools, we've been going to board meetings, before that, the School Reform Commission meetings. We have seen, I have seen, if you want to go back to the Arlene Ackerman Imagine 2014 plan, we had Dr. Height's his action plan, and now we have the board created its own set of goals and guardrails. That's really a very data-driven process. And now we have Dr. Watlington's strategic plan, and going to the meetings and knowing the history, I'm not seeing very much that's new here. I see a lot of vague goals and wishes, which all sound good, but when I read it, and this question did come up briefly in the board meeting last week, and also in the news media, do we have the money for this? And we don't right now. That's fine. That doesn't mean you can't have a plan where you say these are our goals. But I see a number of problems with the plan.
So, this is right now the sort of culmination of Dr. Watlington's tenure so far. He did listening tours, he pulled people together, he had these deep dives into what the district needs. What does this miss, or are there things that it's ignoring that should have been taken into consideration?
Well, it did bring people together, but I have to say, I think they really missed out on the community engagement in the report itself, which is ironic because there's a whole section on community engagement. Members of APS, and we're, teachers, librarians, counselors, parents, and retired educators. We've gone to every single board meeting and the SRC meetings before that. We were not asked to be part of this. And I did address it in one of my op-eds. I call it governance by invitation. So that is one problem, reading about community engagement and transparency. And this plan is a plan that, until APS put some pressure on them and other members of the community put pressure on, they didn't even want to show to people before the board voted on it. So that's one problem, that the board talks about public engagement, and they were about to approve this 5-year plan without anybody ever having seen it. So we wrote to the board. I know other people wrote to the board. And so the day before, they finally said, okay, we're going to pull this out. We're going to review it, and then we'll vote on it next week. So the problem, like, I'll tell you what I don't see in the plan. One, bringing back school libraries with certified school librarians. You know, that's been an issue for years. The Inquirer's written about it. The public school notebook, chalkbeat, that is something that's really on people's minds. We need to bring back school libraries where kids can take out books. A lot of kids really cannot get to their neighborhood libraries. We know that those libraries have been closed in some neighborhoods, nights and weekends. So it's really important to have a school library. I don't see that. I don't see any mention of smaller class size, which is a proven reform, have a better teacher to student ratio. I saw passing mention of art and music, saw very little mention of support staff. And when I look for these things, I say, okay, I'm at every meeting and I hear from the speakers and I see what they're talking about. I think some of that is reflected in the strategic plan, but there's so many things that people come back with, like support staff. And you look at the Inquirer today has a story on a big problem. Now they only mention district schools, but it is a problem in charter schools also, of attendance. So you really need people. The district has had, I don't know how many there are left, but from what I am told, not many, home and school liaisons, truant officers, but more than that. I don't want to just call them truant officers. But obviously, if you have a big attendance problem, you need more support staff. Not saying that. So things that educators know are basic proven reforms, I'm seeing either no mention, like school libraries or class side, or very little mention.
One of the things you had mentioned that is particularly troubling is the idea that this plan came out, they were going to vote on it without the public really seeing it. And then because of pressure, they pushed it back by a week. It seems like there are more and more issues like that with the school board, including speaker policy and things like that. What has that been like for you and people you work with?
Well, it's gotten to the point now where some of our people from apps and people who are allied with apps, and just people who communicate with us online, have actually said to us, I went online to the school district site. The window to sign up opened at 4. I got there at 6:30. It was closed already. There is no longer any kind of, even with the limited speakers, there's no policy that says we're going to have X number of speakers per issue. So you can end up at a meeting with 30 general speakers. And we have actually seen this where almost half of the speakers are on one topic. Last week at the May action meeting, there were 78 action items. Well, if you're only allowing 30 people to sign up, and not everybody's talking about an action item, they may be talking about what's going on at their child's school or just issues in general. But when you have a limit of 30 speakers and you have 78 items, I mean, do the math, you're going to have a lot of people who signed up to speak on something and they're not going to be able to speak. And, apps has, along with Herb Ed, we have sued the board and the district for their speaker suppression policy, which in many ways, in the way that I just cited, is a violation of the Pennsylvania Sunshine Act. So it has gotten worse. And what happened at the May meeting to me and at the April meeting at other apps members was that people were stopped on the way into the auditorium and told they couldn't come in. I mean, and this was early, and the auditorium wasn't even filled up. And this happened to me in May, and I was told you can't go in. My colleague Linda Rubin, they said, yeah, you can go in. You're on the speaker list, and I was told I couldn't go in, and I said, well, I'm going in. I don't know if you're going to send somebody to arrest me, but I am walking into that auditorium because now the board says you can be on the speaker list if you didn't speak the month before, and if you get there in time. I kind of think of it as like your virtual lawn chair. You're getting in line, so you can be one of the lucky people. But now if you are told, and it's the board's decision whether or not you come in as a speaker, now you can't come in at all because you're not on the speaker list, and that is getting pretty oppressive. We have also noticed, and we put pictures of this on our website, last month when one of our people was detained in the atrium downstairs and told you can't come up, the board only had 82 chairs set up in an auditorium that holds 240 people. This month they had 110 chairs set up, again 240 people. And after I was told I couldn't come in, and I was in there anyway, and President Streeter came in, and I told him what happened, and I said, incidentally, no matter how many chairs you set up, people are allowed to be here. If they want to stand, they want to stand. But it's gotten really oppressive, and people are getting pushed farther and farther back in the auditorium because they set up more and more tables and chairs for district staff. So, I mean, the optics are so clear that the public is not the priority. And these are public meetings. So you can have surveys, you can have committees, which again, we were invited to. You can have all of this illusion of reaching out to the public, and you can have community engagement committees that are not open to the public. What do you have? You have what I call governance by invitation. We will choose how we hear from you, and we will choose how your questions are taken. That is not governance, and that's why we always come back to we need an elected school board. If government officials are not accountable to the voters as they are, in a democracy and in every other district in the state and surrounding counties, then they're not accountable to the public, and they will do these things. And I'd like to mention too that at that meeting, there were 71 items remaining after they withdrew a couple items. At the end of the meeting, President Streeter put all 71 into one bundle, and they took one roll call vote. Mm-hmm. Now, they had done this before. So when somebody calls, one of the board members says, so moved, and then they'll go board member by board member, and, one will say, I'm going to vote yes on everything except for 17 and 22. I'm going to vote no. And then the next board member says, oh, I'm going to vote yes on everything, but I'm going to abstain on 3, 5. And it's like keeping score. But you as a member of the public, and we're pretty experienced, we've been doing this for years, we can't keep track of what they're voting on. What was newly astounding to me was they did all this with a city council member in the audience. Council member Jamie Gautier came to be with her constituents because they had been fighting for many months to get Sayre Pool reopened, and they did a great job. And so they finally had it on the agenda, and the board was going to vote to reopen the pool. And council member and her constituents waited till the very end of this 7-hour meeting until 11 o'clock at night. And the board, I thought in a move that was so disrespectful, didn't even pull out that item separately, so the people in West Philly who fought so hard for that pool could have their moment of, we won this one. 71 official items that amounted to new spending of about $500 million. Many of those items are no bid contracts. Now, you could not imagine the outcry if city council tried to pull something like that. Stuck something on the agenda that had no bidding process, no examination, no like going into committee and then waiting for people to just stick it on there and vote for it, and no deliberation. No governmental body in a democracy should be operating that way.
I'd like to bring Denise Clay Murray here on Philadelphia Homeland.
Hi, and thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Has there been any discussion in terms of this 5-year plan about the court decision that came down on funding equity for the schools? If you're saying that you don't have enough money for something, wouldn't that be a good place to start?
Do you mean starting with trying to get more money from the state?
Yes.
That would be a good place to start. With the new mayor coming in, that's another good place. And with city council, which is going to have so many new members on it, maybe that's an opportunity to get more money. We in APS would also say, while we're fighting and advocating to get money from the city and the state, let's also look at the board's spending priorities. For example, last week, there were 2 official items that were passed, and again, with almost no deliberation by the board. There were 3, one was withdrawn. So we ended up with 2 items, one for a new reading curriculum for $20 million and one for a math curriculum, $20 million. And these are online programs. Now, I've talked to a couple teachers one high school teacher, one kindergarten teacher, who were very skeptical of this, and especially after over a year of having their kids online in virtual school, couldn't understand why the district was spending $40 million so far on an online curriculum. For a lot of reasons, it just didn't make sense. But again, it was rushed through without much examination. There might have been 1 or 2 questions from the board, but and that doesn't include the assessment piece, I might add. So yeah, we need more money. We always do, but at the same time, what are we spending money? Are we spending money on consultants? Dr. Watlington's been here a year now, but was actually preceded by a consultant that he brought in at a cost of $450,000. So when you are always in a state of insecurity, the board always needs to be examining its own spending priorities.
Now, speaking of insecurity, you just mentioned that, when you look at this plan, there are a lot of curriculum changes. Now, this is a student body, and the students in the school district of Philadelphia that seems to go through curriculum changes every 5 minutes. Has anyone thought about how they're going to make it so whatever it is you learned or whatever it is you taught the kids in the previous group of curriculums is actually going to mesh with what you want to do with the new curriculums? Because otherwise, you're going to have a bunch of students that are starting over from scratch, and nothing makes, as someone who was taught school, nothing makes a kid more frustrated than having to relearn something they just learned 6 months ago in a totally different way.
Well, that is especially a problem in a district that is data driven. So, kids move, and our student body is definitely more transient than it should be. But in a situation where we know that's the case, how do we make it so that we don't make a child feel like he or she's already behind? But you have to look at that, I think, through the lens of such a data driven system, like the board's goals and guardrails, I mean, they talk about whether children are proficient in reading, math, science, whether the high school kids are at a certain place in the keystones. I mean, you know, one of the parts of this plan was we're going to bring in more testing, which I think a lot of people would say that that is the wrong direction to go. Because if you say, well, a child is moving and, you know, maybe he was learning about, you know, Greece and this in his school, and now he's learning about, you know, ancient Rome, that's not really that big. It becomes a problem when you're looking at, is this child on the same page and can this child take the standardized test and achieve, that's the word, achieve an outcome. That's not going to work, because if you're looking at whether children are learning or achieving only through the lens of test scores, that really does a disservice to the children and already makes them feel like they're behind.
And also, and this is just my experience as the wife of a college professor, you have these kids that then go into college classrooms and are in some ways incapable of independent thought, and which makes teaching them things like how to analyze a piece of literature or something next to impossible, and leads to like a grown man walking through the halls telling really crazy things because he's trying to do this and is met at every turn with frustration. I guess my last question is, you brought up the concept of an elected school board versus an appointed school board. Now, as someone who has covered elected school boards for much of the last 30 years, and people get mad at me when I say this, they are not a panacea, because while you're not necessarily dealing with the politics of a board being appointed as opposed to elected, you're dealing with electoral politics in a situation that they don't necessarily fit into. If Philadelphia goes to an elected school board, and there seems to be a movement in that direction, how in a perfect world, how would you keep the electoral politics part of an elected school board separate from the, we're here for the kids and we got to do what's best for the kids part of a school board? Because most of the elected school boards I've seen, that doesn't happen.
I don't think there's a problem. If it's not a problem, like in Bryn Mawr or Bucks County or Council Rock, if people in those places are entrusted to elect their own representatives, I don't think that the people of Philadelphia should be disenfranchised. And, when President Streeter came into the board and was talking about depoliticizing education, and I said, there's no such thing as depoliticizing education. You may be appointed, not elected. You're on a political body. You're on a political body that has an almost $4 billion budget. You're either going to represent your constituents, who is everybody in the city, including people who go to school or whose kids go to school or work in schools. You are part of a political body. If you say we're going to depoliticize, to me, that's saying I'm not going to say anything because I want to make pretend this isn't a political system. Or you're going to come to the school board, you're going to go to Harrisburg, you're going to fight for the funding, you're going to fight for the curriculum that you want for your kids, you're going to fight for getting out lead and asbestos. So I don't see it, Denise, the way that you're seeing that, like there's these terrible electoral politics, and then it's like we're here for the kids. I mean, I've been watching this district for over 20 years, and I've seen the school board and the SRC and the school board, and I've been to school board meetings in other districts. If we don't trust the people of Philadelphia to pick their elected representatives, I mean, let's just appoint everybody. Let's appoint the mayor. Let's appoint city council. We live in a representative democracy, and we have to be able to say, in a democracy, if our school system is working, we are teaching people how to be good citizens. And part of that is advocating for what you want for your community and your children And I think there's this illusion that, and I think you put it well, whether it's politics of elected or politics of appointed. I think some people want to make pretend that because a board is appointed, there's no politics, which, is, as a 20+ year observer, not the case.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I'm going to give you back to our co-host, Larry McGlynn, and you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5.
Thank you, Denise.
Lisa, before we let you go, I'd like to ask you about the op-ed you had in Billy Penn last week. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I had been, as a Philadelphian, of course, watching this election, and I went to 3 or 4 live forums for the mayoral candidates, and then I watched some on TV and online, and I wasn't happy with the level of discourse around education. And then when Cheryl Parker was nominated as the Democrat to run in November, of course, her issues became much more to the forefront. And her main platform that's gotten a lot of attention was year-round school, which surprised me. Again, you could go back and pull out all the speaker lists at the Board of Education. I am pretty sure you will not find anybody who said, please bring back year-round schooling. It's hardly a priority. People want money spent on the old buildings. They want money spent on taking lead and asbestos out. They want money spent on bringing back school librarians, on so many issues that are in the news that people talk about. I had somebody from the transition team. Actually, there were 2 people, but one put it right out on Twitter. I was on the transition team. I didn't hear anybody talking about year-round school. There's so many obstacles to that. I think that I see it as a diversion. There's so many. I mean, are you going to hire a whole new workforce in a time of having problems that come up all the time about being able to recruit and retain teachers? Are you really going to hire a whole new summer workforce? I mean, are you going to have kids in excuse me, non-air conditioned buildings? Are you going to have teachers who don't live in the city, whose kids are on a different schedule? How is this going to work?
Yeah, I think in a perfect world, as a concept, it's worth talking about. Like, we can have the discussion. But like you said, the infrastructure isn't in place. Some of these buildings don't have air conditioning and can't have air conditioning because they're so old, it can't be installed. So I don't know how you do that.
And also, there was another article in the Inquirer today that said that Pennsylvania is losing the most teachers of any state right now.
Right.
So, if you're losing more teachers than Florida, and I'm kind of trying to figure out how that's happening,
right.
Talking about year-round school, particularly in a city where, as Larry pointed out, a lot of the buildings are too old to have air conditioners in them. And we've gotten rid of the plan-con system, which I'm still trying to figure out why we did that. It kind of doesn't make, it's going to be hard to pull off if you actually decide to do it that way.
I don't see a reason to even think about it, honestly. Even if you had everything, if you had great buildings and they were air conditioned and kids had schools had librarians, I don't understand the benefit of sending kids to school in the summertime. Our kids, what most of our kids who are on vacation, it's summertime, it's warm out. They're going swimming in the pool, they're going on vacation to the shore with their family. Our kids, like, I don't want to pigeonhole people, but I don't think a lot of our kids are going on skiing vacations. So summertime is really an important time for families to be together, to like visit extended family in other parts of the country. I truly believe that the whole issue of year-round school is a diversion. There's so many obstacles. We really need to focus on what we need to be doing right now to get kids in healthy buildings, in smaller class size, bringing back librarians, having curriculum that's meaningless. I mean, I'm sorry, meaningful, and get rid of like the kind of meaningless, you know, standards aligned, in other words, test score aligned curriculum. I really could do all those things. I mean, we really could if we said, okay, we're going to fight for funding, we're going to reorder our spending priorities. I mean, I would have given up a long time ago if I thought we couldn't do those things. I really think we can do these things, but let's keep our eye on the ball here. Year-round schooling is not going to happen, and I don't even think it's something that our kids need.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us.
Yes,
Thank you so much, Larry. Thanks, Denise.
Okay, you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website, www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHM WPPM. We'd like to thank Lisa Haver of the Alliance for Philadelphia Public Schools for being with us. And Denise, you're not going to believe this. WPPM's Spring 2023 Fund Drive starts today. You're muted, but I can see you're excited.
Wow, that's a lot of pressure on us because now we got to tell people about it.
Yes. It goes from May 31st to June 7th. You're trying to raise $5,000 to sustain our station. Your donations help us cover upgrades and maintenance. If you appreciate programs like ours on WPPM, please consider making a donation in honor of Hall Monitor at wppm.phillycam.org/donate. So, Denise, was there anything from that interview that we just did that really stood out to you, or that you look at and say, okay, this is an issue?
Well, when you're proposing something like a 5-year plan, which is what Dr. Wadlington did, and then in the next breath you're saying we don't have the resources or the personnel to complete the plan, I don't know about that. That sounds like you may have an issue that you have to work out. It sounds like you put the cart before the horse. But it's also another one of those things that the next mayor is probably going to have to, dip their toe into.
Absolutely.
To look at, how they can make this plan come to fruition, or even if they like the plan at all, and what they can do to influence it in a way to where it's closer to what they want to see. Honestly, I think as someone who has observed the school district for a lot of years, a lot of folks are tired of new plans.
Yeah.
There are communities that are not as planned as the school district of Philadelphia. Folks are tired of plans. They want to see some results. They want to see some consistency. And I don't think the consistency is too much to ask. And yet it's not what people get. And I also just wanted to focus a little bit on the whole elective versus appointed school board thing. Now, if you've ever sat down and talked to me about this, you know that I'm not a big believer in the wonderfulness of elected school boards. And that is because I have seen what happens when you put politics and education together in that way. Sure, the city of Philadelphia has as much right as any other city to pick its elected leaders. But my suggestion to all of you would be, because it looks like we're going down that road, if you thought that you had to monitor campaign financing in the mayor's race, wait till you see what happens with an elected school board.
Yeah.
It's going to make the mayor's race look like a Girl Scout cookie drive. It's the amounts of money that are going to come in the name of education, and I put that in quotes, are going to be ridiculous. So sure, let the citizens of Philadelphia pick their school board, but you know, my thing is this: you need to monitor the contributions. You need to monitor the dark money. You need to monitor all of that, because if you think that folks getting control of a city that way is a little scandalous, wait till you see what they do when they get control of a school board that way. I've covered a lot of school boards that the campaigns were such that people who had no business getting anywhere near a school board ended up on the school board. I remember one dude I was covering the Conrad Weiser School District in Berks County. And this guy hadn't even finished high school and he was on the school board. So I'm telling you, if you want an elected school board, great, but make sure that you know exactly what you're getting into, because it's not as easy as you think.
I believe it was Michael Moore who complained about his high school to the administrators, and they told him nothing you can do about it. So he ran for the school board and won at 18 years old. But it's a very interesting question too, right? Because it's almost the same discussion we're having about the judges.
Yes.
During the primary, right? Is it better to have appointed judges? Is it better to have elected judges? Either isn't really a good way, right? Because if you have somebody making an appointment, first of all, you have to be careful that person making the appointment is going to make good appointments.
Right.
But secondly, even if they do, the people they've appointed are now beholden to that person. So they're going to kind of follow the direction of whoever appointed them, in this case, the mayor. If you have an elected school board, that charter school money's coming in. It's going to come in by the boatload. And that could really skew what we have here and really make things worse. So I don't know that there's a good way to select a school board. I just don't know. There hasn't been a good way to that we've figured out to do that.
Right. And you're absolutely right in that there appears to be no good way. And like I said, we are moving in the direction of an elected school board. But what people need, all people need to understand about this, in addition to the money, Moms for Liberty is coming to Philadelphia this year. Yeah. And if you don't think that a Moms for Liberty or a group like that is looking at Philadelphia and thinking, oh, good, who can we get on the school board?
Yeah.
Then you've kind of missed the point. Sure, know what you're doing. That's all I'm going to say. Know what you're doing, and know that if you thought this year's mayor's race, in which $33 million was spent on a job that maybe pays $250,000, if you thought that was outrageous, wait until you see the first school board election.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. But like we said multiple times, the other way isn't great either. There's just no good way to do this. One person who is in favor of an elected school board, even though we did not discuss it with him in this interview, is Republican mayoral candidate David O. And we'll talk to him more as time goes on to hear more about his thoughts on other areas. But this interview we're doing here, we're going to cut it up. We're going to split it in two because it's a little long. So we're going to play the rest of it next week. So we'll play the first part this week. We talked to former council member O about his decision to run for mayor and what some of the major themes of his campaign are going to be. And it's really interesting, some of the things he talks about and sort of the way he's looking at this race. One of the things we do have to remind people is, even though the Democratic primary traditionally has been, for all intents and purposes, the election. But there's still an election in November. And it is, I believe it's important to hear, everybody is running, because especially when you have somebody who, like David, who I would say is a legitimate candidate. More so than Republicans have put up in past elections for different offices in Philadelphia. This is somebody who served 3 terms on city council. is well known. So this is somebody who needs to be heard, I think, regardless of what your political
Right.
opinions
I
are.
mean, this is a guy who, for all intents and purposes, for many, many years has been your favorite Democrat's favorite Republican.
Right.
And because of that, you know, he stands to be like the strongest challenge to the Democratic City Committee since Sam Katz, who
Yep.
I'm also hearing is considering getting into this race as an independent. I don't know why he'd do that. And I don't know what his path to victory would be, but that's the hot rumor right now. But
Yeah, there isn't one
Mhm.
as an independent. So, well, I shouldn't say that. You never know. You never know. But you know. So here is the first part of our interview with Republican mayoral candidate David Up. All right, mayoral candidate David O. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for the invitation.
So let's start with the very first question. What made you decide now was the time for you to run for mayor?
Well, there's really two things. One is that I think the city, from my perspective, is at a very, very important point in that things have gone so wrong. Much of it is really beyond anybody's control. It was COVID, it was George Floyd, it was rioting, it was, all of the forces that have come together. And what I mean is the bad forces. Poor quality education, lack of job opportunities, general feeling of neglect and being discarded throughout our city, and it culminated in um, a lot of violence, a lot of crime, a lot of murders. And I think if there was ever a time for some well-intended policies that is very light on law enforcement, this was not the time for it. It just kind of combined at a really bad time, and the result of which it really kind of exacerbated the situation where we are now in a continuous cycle of violent crime and fear. And it's changed people's behaviors. First of all, we have a lot of people who left the city. We have a lot of professionals like school teachers, social workers who are leaving their jobs here in Philadelphia. We have prison workers who don't want to work in our prisons. We don't have space. We have really bad conditions. There are a lot of things that are going on. The economy is really suffering. And because of that, the burdens are most likely going to fall on the poorest people in our city. That means real estate taxes and other types of taxes. And people's buying power has been sharply reduced. I mean, if people had $100 in the bank, now it's worth like 60, right? So people are losing money. So while they're getting money, their dollars are purchasing less. And so all of this coming together, I think it is really important that we give people a choice. And so the choice, I think, has to be much clearer. That is, how are we going to deal with deadly violence? How are we going to actually improve education? How are we going to bring jobs into the city that people can actually get those jobs and get paid? And how are we going to basically uplift the morale of the city in the areas of our city that it's most needed? So I think, after everything that's happened, we cannot continue to decline the way we are. I think there has to be a complete turnaround of this city. And I think there is no easy way to do it. And I think that's one of the problems, because in politics, what sells is a lot of fanciful, idealistic things. The prettier the words, the nicer the concepts, the more people like it. The problem is we have been doing that for years now, and it's been an utter failure. The utter failure means we have dead bodies, we have injured people, we have injured mentality, and I don't see that is going to get better. There's always a competition for the goodies when it comes to electing a mayor, and that's why there's so much money in these races. And, this is the most expensive mayor's race that we've had. Races seem to no longer be about how much money you can raise from your family, friends, and neighbors. Races nowadays seems to be about super PACs and dark money. I mean, just the amounts of money that are brought in. But there isn't anyone doing that who isn't tied to something they want. And wanting something good for the public is fine, but so much of that is really based on status quo or changes that are very competitive because someone has a bottom line to receive. So I think all of that means it's important to offer the voters a different choice. And so the other thing that I look at is I've served for 3 terms, 11 years. I could do another 4. That would be 16 years. In the additional 4, am I going to contribute anything important? I don't think so. I think everything that we've talked about, from education reform to improving families' quality of life, criminal justice reform, economic opportunity, I think I've introduced bills on all of them. And most of my bills have been defeated. Even my resolutions have been defeated, and more so. We're in more and more of a political, polarized climate where even good ideas are going to be rejected simply because of the political party. And I'm in the minority. I'm a Republican. So my ideas are easily defeated by simply saying, yeah, it sounds nice, but he's a Republican, so there's something suspect about what he's doing. And people will oftentimes say, well, you might have a point there, right? So it becomes difficult as a legislator. I think what's important is then that you offer the people the choice. They either take the choice or they don't. But that is that I think is very important. The circumstance, and then is it a situation today? Is this a race that I can win? So sometimes, and a lot of times, the idea of giving people a choice is not really so much about winning, but if you can't win, what choice are you really giving people? And so this race is also unusual because it's not really so much about the forces that typically get people elected. I said in the primary that I don't think this race is about money, and there's a ton of money in it. And money is always important. You have to have a certain amount of money, but more than that, I don't know you need, simply because when people generally get the idea, the ones who are going to vote are going to vote. Doesn't matter how many more times you tell them what you want to tell them. They pretty much have made up their minds. I think this is that kind of election. And I also have some other information that I look at. So to me, it's a winnable race, but it has to go through, it has to unfold in the way that is kind of set out. It is really a very predictable process.
So what, a Republican really hasn't held the office since I think the 40s. It's been a very long time. What kind of coalitions do you have to build in order to get that a base for you, and then take that to victory?
So the coalition has to be this: you have to have a certain percentage, not a majority, but a certain percentage of a variety of voters, Republicans, Independents, and Democrats. There are people who vote purely on party lines. And many of them are not coming out to vote. They're just not coming out. They're not driven to vote. If you just want to vote Democrat or you just want to vote Republican, I don't think they're coming out to vote. The people who, for example, simply want to vote D for Democrat, in their minds, they already have a winner. They don't need to come out. And this is not an exciting race for many people. If you want status quo, you got it. It is an exciting race for people who want change. And those people include Democrats, Republicans and independents. But they're really kind of identified by their communities. Do you think of yourself as an artist? Do you think of yourself as, a working Joe? Do you think of yourself as someone who is looking at a more global economy in Philadelphia? Are you very interested in reforming city government to get past what you believe is complacency and corruption? Those people are interested, or they are people that can vote but never had a reason to vote. They're not voting on issues, they're just voting on the idea that government has never responded to them, it's never been interested in them. So if they have someone who is interested, they want to be counted. And so they come out to vote for the person who sees and hears them. In that case, that's me. And if you have a large enough group of them, then that makes the difference in the vote count. So all elections are based on vote count, right? We just went through a primary. Everybody knew that although there are 800,000 Democrats, that only 300,000 were going to vote at most 300,000. And people pretty much can tell of the 800,000 Democrats, which ones are going to vote, who are the 300,000. And then any of the candidates, or all of the candidates, any of the candidates who know anything, they are not focusing on trying to reach all 300,000. They're focusing on 50, 20, another 20, and another 10. They're focused on 100,000 people. And so that's where the election is. By the same token, when we get into the general election is different than the last 20 years of elections. And, we only have municipal elections like mayoral elections every 4 years. So you can't really go by the pattern of the last mayoral election or the one before it, because you didn't have candidates that could bring out a vote. So you'd have to accurately calculate what is the turnout on November 7th and who is voting. And I don't know that people have been doing that in this city in the last 20 years. But I have, right? Because I have to run my race that way. I've run 5 times and I have calculated the vote 5 times. And the vote for me in the primary is very different than the vote for me in the general. And I think I show that to people every time I run. The reason for that, and the reason for some of the miscalculations, I think, in the primary is each category of race is very different. For example, if you have a pool of, let's say, 120,000 Republicans, and you have an uncontested race, which is the mayoral race, how many people are coming out? Well, that's the maximum. You can't get any Democrats, you can't get any independents, you can't get any third party. And what happens is that is the maximum number you can get in the Republican primary. That is not the maximum number I can get in the general election, because that becomes a different race. And what happens in the general election is the number of Democratic voters reduces. It doesn't increase, it declines. And the reason for that is because people have voted in the Democratic primary, their candidates lost, and many of them are not interested in voting in the general. When their candidate loses, the entire operation shuts down. There's no more campaign office, no more advertising, no more purchasing, there's no more staff, there's no more people working the streets, there's no more printing, there's no more mailers, there's no more any of that. And so you have a winner, and the winner is declared the winner of the entire election. And a lot of them feel like they don't need to come out and vote because the election's over. So the number of Democrats who vote in the general election reduces. And in the last 20 years, there's a small number of independents and Republicans who come out. They're just small in number, right? It's 7 to 1 in this city registration. And so they don't really have many people who come out.
All right, we would like to thank Republican mayoral candidate David O for joining us. We're going to have the rest of that interview on the show next week, so you can see the entire interview. Now, Denise, you're not going to believe this. The WPPM Spring 2023 Fund Drive is still going on.
Yes.
It's still happening. May 31st to June 7th. Nothing's changed in the last half hour. We are raising $5,000 to sustain our station. Your donations help cover upgrades and maintenance. If you appreciate programs like ours on WPPM, please consider making a donation in honor of Hall Monitor at WPPM.phillycam.org/donate. Now, Denise, in the first part of that interview with candidate David O, was there anything there that you said that really stands out, or that's an interesting way to look at it, or anything you vehemently disagreed with?
Well, I'm glad that he's actually thought out how he can win this race. And I also, thought that it was good how he broke down, how many Democratic voters versus Republican voters. But what he needs, but what I don't think he quite understands, or what he quite understood, is that the 300,000 people, actually it was less than 300,000 people, it was like 272,000 people who actually took time out of their day to go to the polls and vote on May 16th in the primary. That's for everybody. That's not just Democrats. That's Democrats, that's Republicans, that's independents that voted on ballot questions. That's everybody. That was all the voters. So, I don't know how many Republicans in particular were in that mix, but if he doesn't get them all and is able to pull some people away from Sherrell Parker from the Democratic side, which he can do, because like I said, he is your favorite Democrat's favorite Republican. He sees a path to victory, but I'm not sure if it's all that clear a path, because it's going to depend on some things going right for him that, probably won't.
Well, and when you look at the numbers, if you put all the independents in one group and say that's one political party, that means the Republicans are really the third party in the city, because independent voters outnumber the Republicans.
Yes.
So even the base for a Republican candidate is a big disadvantage over what it is in, say, the suburbs, where independents are a smaller percentage of the voters. It's an uphill climb. 30% of the electorate in the fall, let's assume we get to 30%, would probably be about 300,000 voters, give or take. And of those 300,000, probably about 210,000 would be Democrats, which really only leaves about 90,000 Republicans and independents if we even get to that number. So, the problem there is hoping that you can get, a big chunk of that Democratic vote. And I think that's a big challenge,
It is. And especially when you consider that there's also going to be city council elections happening at the same time. And you have the Working Families Party that's trying to become the minority party in council. That's probably where the Republicans will put most of their efforts, to make sure that there is at least one Republican at large member, and that Brian O'Neill, the 10th district councilman, who is the lone Republican district councilman on council, that he retains his office.
So we're going to hear more from mayoral candidate David O next week. And our own Lance Haver will be with us to talk about nuclear power. If you haven't seen his piece on our website, go check it out. We're going to talk more about that next week. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week on Hall Monitor.